faculty, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. The Department on Law and Human Rights of the University of Asia Pacific, in partnership with South Asian Institute of Advanced Legal and Human Rights Studies, SAILS, is organizing this webinar on domestic violence, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying on women in COVID-19 pandemic, challenges and the way forward. We have amongst us eminent discussants who are going to shed light on this very important topic that is affecting the lives of thousands of women in our country. And now I would kindly request our Honorable Acting Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sultan Mahmood, to give his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Ishaq. Honorable members, Board of Trustees, faculty members, and respected guests, good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. I am extremely happy that the Department of Law and Human Rights, in partnership with SAILS, is organizing this webinar on a particularly important topic that is affecting our society in this pandemic. While the pandemic is wreaking havoc in the whole world and our country, a silent epidemic is also plaguing the lives of thousands of women in this country. Domestic violence, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying is affecting the lives of millions of women in this country. And as a nation, must deal with this burning issue. The pandemic has made things worse as people are locked in their houses, causing the domestic violence on women to increase dramatically. Moreover, cyberbullying and sexual harassment is also continuing unchecked. While our country is making rapid progress in the economic front, we as a nation cannot consider ourselves as a developed nation if we cannot ensure the respect and dignity of women in our country. I hope this webinar will make important strides in starting the dialogue that is needed to find out the root cause of this problem and hopefully find a solution for it. I hope the eminent discussants we have in this webinar can shed light in this area and can provide a way forward to deal with the issues of domestic violence, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying of women in this pandemic and beyond. I congratulate the Department of Law and Human Rights of EOP and SAILS for organizing this webinar and thank everyone for the successful hosting of this event. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your introductory remarks. The way we are going to do the webinar is Ms. Nazia Wahab, Assistant Professor of the University of Asia Pacific from Department of Law and Human Rights, is going to make a presentation on this topic, followed by a discussion from our three eminent discussants. We have Ms. Khushi Kabir, Vice-Chairperson of South Asia Foundation Bangladesh Chapter and Coordinator Nijirakuri. We have Barrister Sara Hossain, Advocate Supreme Court of Bangladesh and Honorary Executive Director of BLAS. And we also have Ms. Zyma Islam, staff reporter of the Daily Star. So after the discussants give their opinion as well, we're going to have a question and answer session where we can have discussion from the people who are hearing this webinar, and we can have a fluid discussion about this important topic. So now I would kindly request Ms. Nazia Wahab to give us a presentation on this topic. Ms. Wahab.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. I am Nazia Wahab, Assistant Professor, Department of Law and Human Rights. As my research interest on human rights, gender and development, When I have been selected for this presentation, I felt it's a great opportunity for me to share my knowledge with all of you. I won't take too long. I will try to finish my presentation within 10 to 15 minutes. I would like to begin my presentation by telling a story. The story which has been published on the Daily Star on April 2021. Hashi married her husband, Rubel Hossain, a day laborer from Kumilla. At the age of the 20, 2 years later, they had their first child. According to Hashi's brother, things between the couple went to bad to worse. Soon after that, at the first week of the March, Hashi took her son to her mother's house in Dhaka to save herself from that she described as torture. At this mediation, Hashi told those present that the Rubel tortured her regularly. To this point, the pain was unbearable for her. She begged the elders not to pressure on her. She is reported to have said, "If you send me with my husband, he will kill me this time." Her family and locals left her with the husband and went home. That was the last day anyone saw her alive. So in this presentation, at first, I will try to define some concept. Then thereafter, to establishing my issues, I will try to show some service and analysis, and then I will discuss about some laws and the legal protection related to the matter, and then available services. And finally, I'll try to give some probable findings and the solution. What is violation? Violation is often perceived as the expression of the assault against the person. Etymologically, it is rooted in the Latin word violatia, which refers to the carrying out the force against something. Violence is an improper act and unacceptable use of the force against a human beings by another human beings. Thus, violence is social behavior of a person that can be harmful to another person. According to Audi, violence is a vigorous attack against the person's own dignity, which can be happen physically, psychologically, or both. Domestic violence can be different ways. For example, domestic violence can be physical, emotional, sexual, or economic. As per the United Nations standard and the Bangladeshi law, domestic violence can be physical, psychological, sexual, economic. Physical force in ways that can be injured the partners or put him or her at the risk of the injured pushing, hitting, slapping, beating, choking, and so on. Psychological can be non-verbal, verbal, such as the continual blaming, coercion, controlling, threatening, insulting, verbal rebuke. Sexual include exploit partners sexually or receive unwanted sexual advantages, forcing to participate in the sex or unwanted sexual activities. Economic may include depriving partner from the inheritance of the properties, devastating of the properties, forcing partner to work or not to work, making partner financially dependent, and so on. So the definition has been broadly adapted in our laws, which is Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act 2010. According to this act, domestic violence means physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, economic abuse against a woman or child of a family by any other person of that family with whom or has been in a family relationship. So it is said that during the COVID situation, the violence against women has been increased. And in this presentation, I will try to focus some issues, domestic violence against women, rape, child marriage, cyberbullying. As you see in this slide, I am showing here just 2 months of the statistics of the domestic violence against women, which is April and July 2010. As you see, the domestic violence against situation on July 2020 is higher than the rate of the April 2020. It means that the domestic violence against women is increasing day by day. In this slide, I am showing here the dowry dowry-related violence against the married woman. I am here showing just 5 years of the statement from 2016 to 2020. As you see on the 2017, it was at its higher rate, but subsequent 2 years it was decreasing. But suddenly on 2020, it was started to increase. Then I will try to discuss about the rape, and here I have adapted the definition which has been given, and according to section 375 of the Penal Code 1860. And as you see in this chart, I am showing here the 5-year statement of the rape situation from 2016 to 2020. First 3 years, it's just at a stable situation, but drastically on 2020, it started to increase, and on 2020, it has been increased drastically. Then I will try to discuss about the sexual harassment, stalking, or which is commonly known as the teasing. And here, sexual harassment means the definition which has been given in section 4 of the guidelines of the sexual harassment given by the High Court Division. And see, maybe this is the situation of 5 years, the sexual harassment and the stalking. I am showing here the 5 years of statement. Maybe people are now more aware than before, or maybe due to the pandemic or the lockdown, humans' mobility has been decreased. That is maybe the reason. On 2016, it was at its highest rate, but subsequent years, it has been decreasing. Now I am showing the status of the child marriage. This is another important issues during the pandemic. During the pandemic, most of the families lost their jobs, and due to their poor financial condition, they thought their female child as their burden, and they prefer the child marriage. I am here just showing just 1 month of the statistics of June 2020. You see the total child marriage incidence was 462, and stop child marriage was 207. As UNICEF said, 10 million of the additional girls at risk of the child marriage due to the COVID-19. Then I will try to say about the cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is a situation which is commonly known as the cyberbullying is basically an act done by the person against the another person by using electronic communication by social media. So during the pandemic, most of the educational institutions conducted their education through through the digital devices and by using the cyberspaces. But this is maybe the reason for increasing the cyberbullying during the pandemic situation. But I didn't find any scientific data which I can show that especially during the COVID period, the situation has been increased. But I can show you the report which has been published on April 2021 and December 2020. It is said that the survey of the Bangladesh Information and Communication Technology ICT division that the 64% of the girls in the cities and 33% of the villagers are the victims of the harassment by receiving sexually exploited videos, messages, and the photos. Bangladesh has a high rate of the cyberbullying, and 80% of the victims of the women aged from the 14 to 22, said the additional Deputy Police Commissioner Nazia Islam of the Cybercrime Division of the Dhaka Metropolitan UNB reports. Then what are the challenges actually? You know that our women are the half of our population, and due to different type of violation, women become vulnerable, and a vulnerable population never can take part in the development process. As the United Nations Secretary General said, the global goals cannot be achieved without ensuring gender equality and the women's empowerment. So here, actually, today's topic is a vast topic, and it's not possible to dig down in every single issues. But here I can try to find out some probable reasons for those issues I have discussed earlier. The reason may be the mental distress because of the pandemic or lockdown. It can be the financial instability or problem within the laws and our legal system, lack of the awareness and the proper literacy, lack of the proper monitoring mechanism. It's a good sign that Bangladesh has a number of the laws and special legal systems for protecting the issues. For example, in Bangladesh, we have Domestic Violence Protection and Prevention Act 2010, the Acid Control Act of 2002, and the Acid Offence Control Act 2002, the Prevention of the Women and Children Repression Act 2000, the Prevention of the Women and Children Repression Act 2000, the Dowry Prohibition Act 2017, the Child Marriage Restraint Act 2017, the Penal Code 1860. Then we have also the Digital Security Act 2018, Information Communication Technology Act 2018, Guidelines of the Sexual Harassment by the High Court Division. In addition to the laws and the special the legal system, we have also some available services for the women for those issues. For example, in Bangladesh, we have a one-stop crisis center, emergency helpline 111, National Helpline Center for the Violence Against Women and Children hotline 109, Upojela Women Affairs Officer, Victim Support Center, Nari Shishu Nirjaton Cell for the Prevention of the Violence Against Women, District Legal Aid Office, different NGOs, for example, BLAST, Bangladesh National Women Lawyers, BRAC, and so on. Isn't it surprising that we have a number of the laws and special legal system and lot of the services? In spite of all of this, our those violation has been increasing day by day. And I am here try to give some probable solution of those issues which I have already discussed earlier. What we can do? We can revise our existing laws and the legal system. We can introduce a easier legal and evidential procedure. We can build up our awareness system among those vulnerable portion, and we can also build up a monitoring system. So in this presentation, I would like to acknowledge some special person and institutions. Without their help, I would never complete my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wahab, for your lovely presentation. Now I kindly request Ms. Kabir to give her remarks on the presentation and make general comments regarding the various issues. Ms. Kabir.
Thank you. Thank you, Nazia Wahab, for giving us an outline and a presentation where you've tried to bring in both the laws and what the actual situation is based on whatever information you have collected both from official data as well as from newspapers. So thank you. I'll try and address it basically from a point of view of somebody who works with women in the rural areas who usually don't have access to all that, and what is actually happening and why is it happening. Because our question is domestic violence, sexual harassment, cyberbullying during COVID-19 and the challenges and what can be the way forward. So domestic, all these have been there for centuries. It's nothing new. But the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, increased and brought forward the issue much more, because during the time there was the lockdown last year, and then again this year, when people are home, they don't have work, when there's a lot of insecurity about what's going to be happening, jobs are at stake, the insecurities increase much more. And we too have found the same results that you have said, that child marriage has increased, domestic violence has increased. Many of the people that we work with and have been working with for 3 or 4 decades have said, you know, their partners who had never raised their hands on them before during the COVID situation have have raised their hands. So, so domestic violence seen is that you are staying locked up in that house with somebody who feels frustrated and takes out that frustration on the person they feel that they have the right to take out their frustration on, which is their wives usually. Or it could be taken on any of the other women members of the family who are much weaker than them. So this is a power situation. The man has the power and feels that one way of exercising this power is through the use of violence, of exercising one's frustration and getting rid of one's frustration is through the use of violence, of blaming somebody who's weaker than you, both, as you have mentioned before, you're weaker both not just physically, but you'll be weaker because you're economically dependent. Socially, they will society will not accept you walking out. Socially also dependent, and legally also, because legally when you're married to the person, you cannot stop that man from entering your room or your house. You're supposed to allow, if he's your husband, to do all that. So domestic violence has increased. Number two, another reason we find that it increased a lot was because there has been distancing and people not moving and gathering as much, which means that the kind of violence that is being perpetuated is not spreading to neighbors and other people who can take a role and an action. And also you're afraid of not having the kind of support system that is required. So that is why domestic violence in my mind has increased a lot. And sexual harassment and cyberbullying. Cyberbullying, even though your statistics say it's gone less, my own perceptions and my own experiences that it has not really gone down that much. In terms of maybe it's not being reported as much, but it definitely is there. And because of the kind of cyberbullying and the kind of sexual harassment young girls face, now that schools and colleges are closed, if any of the girls need to go out for some reason, there are always some young boys there who are harassing them all the time. And very often, a lot of the parents feel that during this pandemic situation, when everything is so insecure, that one of the easiest ways is to get the daughter married off. In that way, you're transferring your responsibility of protecting your daughter from being sexually harassed to the person she's being married to. So that kind of transferring of the responsibility, and that is accepted that this is what, this is what society states, that a girl should not be single and unmarried. So that has increased a lot of, I think during COVID-19, we find that child marriage has increased severely, quite a lot, and much does not get reported for the same reason. Now, you did talk about challenges and ways forward, and you talked about reviewing the existing laws that we have to see that it's made much more thing, and I think Sara will be able to deal with that much better. I would look at it more in terms of the mindset of the people who are supposed to ensure that these laws are actually implemented as it should be in favor of the survivor. The mindset of the police, so if we start from the police, because that's the first place you go to report when you're being harassed or when there is anything against you. The mindset of the police, despite the many trainings, etc., that they are facing, still remains very archaic and very anti-women. They are not willing to take up cases. They are willing to judge the woman on the basis of what she was wearing, what she was not wearing, what she was doing or what she was not doing. So the whole situation is very judgmental and based on the person who's supposed to be taking everyone's equally on their perceptions and their value judgments of what a good girl should be like, a good woman should be like. So I think it's very important, along with when we talk about changing or looking at reviewing the laws, it is also how do we change the mindset of the people who are supposed to be implementing, and this would also be those who are in the, the magistrates, the judges in court, etc. We also have a whole way of wanting to deal, and I see ways forward of how do we make the kind of awareness that people in society do not do victim blaming. And it's not just in the rural villages, it's not just people. I think recent cases that have been very heavily publicized are all being judged on people's perception of whether this one was a good girl, good woman, what she was wearing, what was she doing at that time of the night, what was her behavior. Actually, was her behavior pattern in a way that is in compliance with what society has structured the roles and norms to be. And a very big deterrent to this kind of mindset, and I think this is something that I would say is, which should be talked about in the way forward, is whenever you can't get away from it. When you hear the waz, when you hear the khutbas because there's loudspeakers everywhere, over 70% of all these are against women and women's going out, women's dressing. It seems like religion has got an anti-women position, which is not true. I mean, there's so much in every single religion that you can look at positively, but why is it that only these are being taken up? And why is it that you mentioned the Digital Security Act, you mentioned other kinds of other laws that exist, that why are people who are perpetrating this hate, culture of hate against women, and this culture of attacking and violence against women are never censured, are never taken into cognizance. And I think, if we want to start changing society, mindset of people and society, it's very important that we start changing from everywhere, from schools, from institutions, but definitely from all religious institutions. And I'm not identifying or taking only one religion. I think if you look at all religions, you'll see that there are certain problems in the way religion is being projected or portrayed vis-a-vis women. So I would wait for more in terms of questions and answers, but I think the way forward is basically all of us changing our mindset. And one of the most important factors I find that work is having a very strong support system, whether it's nationally, whether it's locally. If you have a very strong support system, it works. There are many cases where people have asked for support from the government officials and they have got it, young girls. And there are many more cases where they have asked and they have not got it, they have been harassed even further. So it's not that I make generalization that everybody is the same, but what I'm stressing this point is because I want to say that if you have the right kind of a person, then that makes it so much easier for the survivor to be able to access and to get some kind of redress. And that is also possible when there is a good support system developed in the community, in the locality, and even nationally. I think sometimes there are different groups that we get together and we provide support to a survivor on certain cases, some high profile cases, we've been able to do that. So then at least there is is difficult. The whole situation is difficult, but that is something that needs to be done. And lastly, I'll just say that the court process, as somebody who's not a lawyer, but have walked with the survivors to try and get justice, it depends on a lot on how has the case been produced in court, how has the investigation report really been written up like, how have the witnesses been intimidated or not? We would not, is there a Witness Protection Act? Are the witnesses being intimidated? Are the judges already of a mindset that has made their mind totally? So all these kind of things, it's not just simply that you go and you do a case and the case gets immediately recorded and you get everything done. It's a long process. Again, as I said, Sara will be able to discuss that, but I have seen in my years of accompanying women on cases such as this, that very often that it is, unless you have everything very clearly worked out, stated, so therefore some cases lose out only because it has been very weakly, the investigation has been done very poorly, and there is not enough strength to be able to challenge it, and also that in the court, the kind of intimidation that the witnesses face, or the kind of evidence that is required, is sometimes quite weak. So those are the problems that really exist from my perspective. And I think these are problems that all of us together, whether we are lawyers or not, whether we are parents or not, whether we are male or female or whatever gender we may want to call ourselves or not, whatever status and we belong to or not, what class we belong to or not, what ethnicity we belong to or not, what religion we belong to or not, every citizen of this country and every human being on this planet has a right. A Universal Declaration of Human Rights is there for everybody. And for citizens of a country, we definitely have our constitutional rights and guarantees. That this is never exercised, and this is never really, this has class biases, this has many different other kinds of biases. I think gender biases, definitely. I think these are things that we need to work out and look at as ways forward. I think this kind of discussion that you're having with your students, I see that you have over 150 people who've logged in, and you probably would put it up in your Facebook or whatever, and maybe others who are not watching it now will watch it later. These are ways through which we can at least disseminate some kind of awareness, some kind of action. And I just like to say that it is possible. If people think that it is not possible, there's no point in doing it, they're wrong. It is possible because we also have many cases where we have been quite successful. I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kabir, for the very important remarks that you have made on the presentation. Now, I kindly request Barrister Hossain to give her remarks on the presentation that was given. Barrister Hossain.
Thank you so much, Ishraq. Thank you, Nazia, for your presentation. I'm just going to make, I think, thanks, Khushi, also for highlighting, I think, a lot of the real issues about the challenges women have in actually claiming any kind of justice in these cases. I think the presentation told us a bit about the laws that exist, but not that much about how they're applied or what are some of the concerns about these laws. I think it's not really enough to say we have these laws. We have to look at what they say and how they operate together. Thank you for providing the opportunity for us to have that discussion, Nazia. But I think the first point to make about the laws, perhaps, is to look at when they're from. We're all quite busy celebrating the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh and the 50th anniversary of independence. And then within a year, we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Constitution. I think we need to ask more questions about why we're happy to celebrate our Constitution and not noticing that we haven't made any effort to change our laws so that they're in line with the Constitution. No one really mentions that. It's just like, it's all great and wonderful, but we can live with British colonial laws and it doesn't really make any difference. No one needs to pay any attention to that. We should also perhaps ask the question that this issue about updating laws is paid attention to when we're talking about, for example, company laws or other laws to do with commercial matters or things that perhaps the government thinks really matter. Our laws on violence against women, whether it's domestic violence, rape, and so on, many of them go back still to being connected to colonial era laws. So why am I saying that? You might say, well, this is a bit odd. We just saw Nazia's presentation and she mentioned many laws that are made in the 1980s and the 1990s and the 2000s. They're not from the colonial era. But the problem is that even the laws made afterwards still connect back in three ways to what happens in the colonial era. One is that the definitions of some of the offenses are not in the new laws. So for example, we have a Nari Shishu Nirjatan Damana, the law on suppression of violence against women and children. But the definition of rape in that law is not in that law. It's not in the 2000 law. It's back in a 19th century law from 1860, made by Lord Macaulay and co. In the British colonial period. And that definition has not changed. That definition is discriminatory in many ways. And one of the ones that people have questioned is, married women, for example, can't claim that they're being subjected to forcible rape by their husbands. A very peculiar idea in the 21st century to think that, when you marry, you automatically give your husband the right to have sex with you no matter what. I don't think that's most of our understanding, but that's what our law currently says. So that's one big issue about how do our laws reflect what women's lives are like now and what kinds of protections we need. Another issue about the laws I just want to raise is that part of the problem with our laws, unfortunately, is to do with us. And it's to do with the fact that even as women's rights organizations in the past and even now, when we're campaigning for changes in the laws, we just go on and on and on and on and on about punishment and prosecution. People take to the streets insisting that unless a man is hanged, there won't be any kind of justice. Again, they're not really that bothered. Khushi's talked about all of the issues that victims face, but unfortunately, many activists don't focus on what the victim faces and don't spend time with the victim, but focus on asking for very harsh punishments and death penalty and hanging, and they will not be satisfied unless they get that. They're not really interested in what the judicial process is doing, whether it's providing protection, whether it's providing support to the victim so that she can survive the whole 5, 6, 7 more years that it will take her to ultimately get justice. So I think we have to be self-critical about the way in which we ask for changes in the laws and how we push for those laws to be then implemented. I think the third issue about the law I wanted to make is that the laws are not only in legislation. They're not only what Parliament passes or what the President, from time to time makes by way of ordinance. Our laws are also in Supreme Court judgments. And there have been quite a number of judgments that deal with these various issues, particularly around rape and stalking and sexual harassment. And some of the legal protection we have would not exist had it not been for the court intervening. The final point about laws, sorry, I said I didn't make 3 points about. The final point is that many of these criminal laws that we discussed, that Nazia presented to us just now, interact in terms of protection with a whole bunch of other laws. So for example, just looking at domestic violence as an example, a woman who faces domestic violence may want to have the person who's subjecting, a woman or a child under our law who can be a victim of domestic violence, may want to have action against the person who's subjecting them to that violence. So they may go to the police, they may want them arrested, they may want their punishment and so on. But they may also want various kinds of protection, which is what they can theoretically get under the Domestic Violence Act. But in addition, they may want to get, for example, custody of their child. Now you can get that, if it's a married woman in a situation of domestic violence, you can go and get that under the Domestic Violence Act, but you may also want to go and get it under various family laws and so on. And your rights about when you can have custody of your child are not fully determined by family laws, but they affect you. So we also have to think about why do women and other victims of domestic violence have different rights because of who they are. So if you're a Muslim woman facing domestic violence and you want to take your children with you, you'll have one set of rights. If you're a Hindu woman, another set. If you're a Christian woman, another set. again, why is that the case in 21st century Bangladesh, that our rights are divided by who we are and where we're located? So I think that's all I want. I mean, there's much more to say, but that's kind of what I wanted to point out about the laws, that it critically, we have to look at the laws from a very critical perspective to see how they can best be fitted to today's Bangladesh and the realities that women actually face when they face violence. The second point I wanted to make was about how the laws are actually used. So one of the big problems we have in terms of being lawyers and researchers and activists is we don't have good information. We have a lot of experience. Again, Khushi very strongly testified to the kind of experience she's had over so many years of providing exactly that emergency shelter and support and continuing ongoing persistent activism without which change doesn't happen. But, and Nazia showed us some of the figures that human rights organizations like Odhikar and then organizations like Manusher Jonne have put together. That's not, again, should a question strike us? Why is this information coming from Odhikar and Manusher Jonne Foundation? They're both citizens groups, right? They're not the Ministry of Home Affairs or the Ministry of Law or the Ministry of Women's Affairs. Where's the data from the Ministry of Women's Affairs telling us this is the number of women who face domestic violence this year? Where's the data from the IGP telling us this number of women filed cases under Dowry Protection Act or under Violence Against Women Act or under pornography control or under digital security, even if they, because we often hear this, we're going to go into a sidetrack, but we often hear that Digital Security Act, this pernicious, terrible law, is there for the protection of women against cyberbullying and cyber violence. Where's the data? What tells us that it's women who are the majority of people, not people who actually just made some passing comment or cartoon about the Prime Minister or some official? It seems to me it's mostly people who make comments about high officials who end up in jail under the DSA and not people who are harassing women online. So let me get back on track with that point. So where do we get the information about how the laws are being used in a systematic way and not just from our surveys or what's coming in news reports? One of the few research studies that really comprehensively looked at, and it's quite old now, I think it's, I'm not sure, but definitely more than 5 years old, but a study that looked at how women seek justice in cases of domestic violence. It's a notorious figure, so I always quote it. It's something like more than 70% of women, married women, experience domestic violence, but only 2% ever seek justice. And that doesn't mean go to court. It means actually ask anybody for help. So that is a shocking statistic. We can spend a lot of our time talking about what the law is, and we should spend time about it because they are very problematic still where they are. But we need to spend even more time talking about what the law is not being used by people. What are the barriers and why don't people know what they are? One of the issues we're seeing now, I mean, a common issues which people will say is people don't know what their rights are. The authorities that are responsible don't necessarily know what their duties are. But there isn't any reason not to be knowing, particularly in this digital age. We see lots of campaigns celebrating lots of national days. Again, we all get government messages saying this is this Dibosh or this Porsche, and we have to do this, we have to do that. Have we ever seen that kind of campaign from the government every single day telling us that this paribaric violence against women is not permissible and this is the action you have to take, this is what you have to do in your home if you see it, this is what you have to do in your college or university if you see it, this is what you have to do in your workplace? I haven't seen that campaign to this day. These are exactly the kinds of things where we need to have government leadership. And in the meantime, we need to see what more we can also do collectively to put that forward. If we look at the situation, and just to finish up this point about the use and what we can do about expanding use, in COVID times, what's happening? We're all seeing right now, we're in lockdown. There are a number of services that are reported that are identified as essential services, quite rightly, health, emergency, other things. Basic legal services and basic protection services for violence are not deemed as essential services. Of course, police are, obviously, our emergency helplines are there. But Khushi, for example, I won't say Khushi personally is an essential service, though she is that sometimes for many of us. But certainly look at Khushi's entire organization, Nijarakuri, or where I volunteer, Blast. We work with incredible people all around the country. In our case, paralegals, in Khushi's case, organized groups all over the country, including in village areas, who are exactly the frontline support when these cases happen. People don't go directly to the police by themselves or directly to the victim support center in the middle of Dhaka coming from Berryband or Jatrabari or wherever. They first call these kinds of organizations or whoever of their members is there on the ground and ask for their help to take them to these places. Now, if these groups are not part of essential services, they're still going out to help people, but they're doing it at considerable risk. So I think that's another big issue that we need to think about at this time. I want to just end by suggesting, I wanted to end by suggesting some of the things we can do, particularly I think for students who are here, some of the things that you can do to kind of help change the system that we have and make a real difference on addressing each of these issues. But just for that, I wanted to just point to a couple of problems with our current law again, that for example, with our domestic violence law, which is a relatively new law, only 10 years old, huge problem with this law. It doesn't address, it's supposed to deal with domestic violence, and the primary kind of domestic violence we see is conjugal, within the marital relationship between husband and wife. But this law doesn't cover, despite the unanimous demands of all women's and human rights groups that it should cover, people who are or have been in a family relationship. By the time the law finally got passed through the ministry and parliament, it said that if you were an ex-wife, you would no longer have protection under this law. And very, very problematic issue, and which many people have faced, that they continue to not only face harassment, but they face real problems in trying to claim their basic economic rights, let alone not only physical protection after they're married. And we know that in our religious laws often don't allow us to claim very much. A Muslim woman can only claim maintenance for 3 months after marriage. She doesn't die 3 months after marriage. She lives for many years afterwards, right? Separated or divorced or whatever. Why doesn't she get to claim maintenance for those other years? Why can't we change those laws to make something, more equitable and in line with what our Constitution says about equal rights? So, sorry, I think I'm over my time. And I'm just going to end with with the last request to those who are here. There are ways you can get involved. You can do work through the university, I think, but volunteer with different organizations that are working around providing specific support to women and children who face violence or stalking or harassment or cyberbullying, any of the issues that we talked about. You can also get involved with certain, because most of these organizations are looking for and really welcome volunteers to assist them with different things, particularly with getting information out, being part of radio programs, Facebook live shows, community meetings when they're possible, assisting clients directly with help, giving them information about where to go, when to go, and so on. So and you can learn a lot. For those of you here who maybe are planning to become lawyers or working in related issues, it's a really great experience for you where you can really, really make a difference as well. Another way to get involved is there are some campaigns and coalitions that work around these issues. I'll put the links in the chat box in a second. One of them is around rape law reform. If you want to work on that issue, there's a national campaign called the Rape Law Reform Coalition, and you can be part of that. Like you might find it quite satisfying, particularly those of you who are interested in legal reforms and changes, to see how much can get done. This campaign has been going for several years now, and one of the great successes of this collective endeavor of many organizations is this year, finally, we've had a few days ago, an acknowledgement by the law minister that the government will be proceeding with changing our ancient Evidence Act from, again, the 19th century, to get rid of this very peculiar rule that's still in our laws, saying that women can be questioned on their previous sexual history in rape cases. So there are these little but important changes that are coming through the campaign. So I'll also put a link to the Rape Law Reform Coalition. And finally, I think the third thing you can do is start working and maybe raising questions in your own discussions and meetings and classes and so on about taking a critical perspective on our laws. So I encourage you to look at, particularly look at these older laws, look at how the definition of rape works, look at the newer laws like domestic violence and Nari Shishu Nirjatan, and see if you think they're actually fit for purpose or more what needs to be done. And a final invitation, look at the Digital Security Act and look at whether it actually helps women or makes women's life more difficult. by actually not providing the relevant protection in this law and harassing the few women who do speak about the situation in our society that needs to be changed and improved. So thank you very much to SAILS for the opportunity in UAP, and thanks again, Nazia, for provoking our discussion.
Thank you, Barrister Hossain, for your very interesting and encouraging comments about this very important issue. Now, I kindly request Ms. Islam, staff reporter of the Daily Star, to give her remarks. Ms. Islam.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It truly is an honor, especially because I'm actually in the presence of some of the people, two of the people who I happen to learn everything I know from. So I've often quoted them, interviewed them, and then I've been in a position where I've listened to them with rapture. So to speak in their presence truly is an honor, and I'd like to sort of zero in a little bit on the sexual harassment bit and কেন এগুলোর আইনি আসলে কোনো সুরাহা কেন হয় না সেই জায়গাটাতে আমি একটু কথা বলতে চাচ্ছি। So what happens on the field? আমরা যখন আমার কথা যদি বলি, আমরা যখন আমরা ক্যামেরার সামনে দাঁড়াতে হয়, প্রায় সপ্তাহে 2-3 বার ক্যামেরার সামনে দাঁড়াতে, 2-3 বার আমাদের ক্যামেরার সামনে দাঁড়াতে হবে, যে পরিমাণ সেক্সুয়াল হ্যারাসমেন্টের মুখোমুখি তখন আমরা হই when we are making ourselves public or public figures, and I'm sure Khushi and Sara have faced the same. I'm not saying that this is in any way related to our age or our profession. It's not. All women face this. All women with a public persona face this. They face a barrage of online sexual harassment that defies any form of logic, and it's almost strategic. It's almost strategic in the sense that they seem to be very anti-feminist, antagonistic to the idea of women's empowerment. They're specifically this sort of like systemic sexual harassment specifically focuses on women who do speak out on social media or traditional media or either one of them, and it can be very nasty to the point where it can mentally and emotionally impact the work that we do. I know I'm not particularly one of them, but I know of many women who decided that it's just easier to stay quiet and not talk at all, not continue the work that they're doing, rather than face the kind of online abuse that we face. সমস্যাটা হচ্ছে যে আসলে এই যখন অ্যাবিউজ গুলোর মুখোমুখি আমরা বা যে কেউ হয় না কেন, how often do we really look for a legal recourse, or how feasible is it to look for a legal recourse? আমি আমার কথা যদি বলি, আমাকে সপ্তাহে যদি 50টা আমাকে অন্য কই কমেন্টস শুনতে হয়।
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind speaking English, because we have some people from other countries as well?
Oh, apologies. Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. Right. So, for example, if I have to face 50 comments all commenting on my body, all abusing me for the kind of things that I'm talking about, but like making very personal attacks at me, how will it be possible for me to file 50 cases every week? That's not going to be possible for me. That's not a feasible solution for me in any way. And I think for a lot of women in the spheres that we work in, that's the situation that they're facing. We see these like surges in online abuse, and then a lot of these surges are connected with activism around women's rights. So, for example, right after a rape, for example, when the Noakhali rape happened, and I don't know if you all remember it, but there was this video that went viral of a very violent rape that took place in Noakhali last year, and then after that, feminist organizations took to the streets, and feminist organizations were on the streets for day and night, asking for justice, demanding reforms in the justice system. The sort of there was this absolute swell in online abuse during that point. Every single live video, every single photo. I remember I took my mother out for there's this protest that was happening in the middle of the night, in the middle of the night, and my mother, who's this woman who's not even an activist. She's not an activist. She's just a normal woman, a teacher with two young daughters, and she wanted to be out on the street with us because this is an issue that she felt or cared very deeply about. And this woman, people took pictures of her, people took photos of her, posted photos of her, that this mother is out at night protesting for the rights of her daughters. They were very touching photos. The kind of comments that she received under those photos, I don't think she's ever faced that sort of vitriol in her entire life from anyone. And I know I'm used to it, but she was not. And it was a very systemic, strategic way of making sure that feminist movements or feminist protests, thoughts, discourses don't have a chance to be inclusive. Because when you're trying to be inclusive, that's when if you want to include your mother and the person who happens to be employed in your home, people who are not professionally related to demanding rights or asking for rights, they're also going to be facing the same form of anger and abuse that people who professionally deal with rights face. And these are the people who, all of these were sexual harassment. The problem is the number, the quantity, and the vastness of it far outnumber any sort of legal avenues that you can, perhaps take. I know that my mother cannot file 20 cases against 20 different commenters. That's just not a possible thing for her to do. So the police did open something called, they have this help desk. I believe it's called just a second, the Police Cyber Support for Women. And although the statistics show that there's been a dip in the number of sexual harassment cases being filed in the last 7 months since the desk was inaugurated, they've logged a total of 10,040 cases. So these are not all of them were police cases. There's a difference. Sometimes women don't want to file a police case, and that's something that the police are saying, that it's not about it being a police case. Sometimes they want to file a complaint somewhere. They don't necessarily have the sort of stamina needed to go through a legal system for years and years and years to try and fight against someone who's committed ornakoi. So, but they do want to make an official complaint somewhere and have that in a database somewhere. And then that's what these women are doing. They are looking for legal recourse, but not necessarily a judicial, necessarily in the judicial system per se. 4% of those cases, of these 10,000 cases, so 4% would be around, I'm guessing, well, blanking, 400 of them. 400 of them would be were specifically related to cases where incidences where the Digital Security Act would have been used. The Digital Security Section 25 of the Digital Security Act, it says that if any person through any website or any digital medium intentionally or knowingly transmits, publishes, or propagates any data or information which he knows to be offensive, false, or threatening in order to annoy, insult, humiliate, or malign a person, then such act of the person should be considered an offense. So under this section, these women could have easily filed a case, but what we know from the ground reality is that these women often do not have, when they do go to the police stations, they're not taken seriously. I've seen women who are trying to, who did try to file cases against people who were harassing them online, but they were just not taken seriously by the police. They'd often be subject to further harassment by the police later on, when the police are doing their so-called investigation, and they don't actually see any legal recourse, and the police more often than not try and ask them to যেটা বাংলাতে বলে মিটমাট করে ফেলো বা সমঝোতা, I can't really particularly translate this right now, but they basically ask the person who's getting abused and the abuser to talk it out, and as if that's in any way a legal solution. I personally don't think so. So 4%, 400 of these complaints were directly related to people sharing content which can be considered the most private of sorts. So during the pandemic, especially, the police have been saying that they've been seeing a rise in content like this because schools are closed, educational institutions are closed, but at the same time, the proliferation of technology as such is such that without necessarily equipping people with the digital literacy that they need to use technology, you're giving people technology that can put them in positions of danger. They might be sharing photos, videos, content of themselves that are only meant to be seen in a private, that's only meant for a private audience. But these abusers essentially disclose this type of content to an audience that this was not necessarily meant for, which is considered an abuse. And what happens is that these women have to go through like the most intense forms of social ostracization because they've essentially been relegated to the status of someone who's willingly participated in a sexual activity and willingly shared sexual content about themselves, for a male audience. And it's really the worst thing that can, I think, socially, it's probably one of the worst things that women perceive can happen to them. I'm not saying that's the worst thing that can happen to them. I'm saying that women perceive can happen to them. And the police have been getting a huge influx of such complaints during the pandemic. A lot of the things that I think one of the major reasons that we see this kind of abuse online is because it truly is a reflection of the society that we're living in. This is a society where we don't have gender equality, we don't have economic equality, we have people who, we don't have education, we don't have equality in the levels of education of people. So when you don't have when you have such an unequal society, you're going to have people who don't necessarily agree with multiplicity in views, who don't agree with gender diversity, who don't agree with having a diversity in thoughts and ideals and politics and religion. So that's exactly what you're seeing online. It's not like what's happening online is something that's surprising, because it's not. It's just a reflection of our society. And now people finally have a platform where they can see it, where they can actually publish the thoughts that they're keeping inside. For example, some of my abusers, I've been very surprised to learn. I mean, not all of my abusers asking me about what I wear online are necessarily from a grassroots level, or people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or people with lower levels of education. No, I've had government officers say these things to me on an open public platform. And I've had people who are working in private services say these things to me when I'm going live with videos talking about. There was this one YouTuber who made a 21-minute video about my ill intentions and what I wear. So, well, I mean, frankly, I'm a little honored. No one's ever spoken about me for 21 straight minutes. So that's there. But having said that, these are people who are educated, and you cannot in any way classify them in any shape or form. It's just a reflection of the kind of society that we have. We don't have any other solution to this except talking more about this, and trying and incorporating gender-related courses in our education system. That's honestly the only way that we can get around this. I'm not going to be filing cases against every single person, like I said. So I'm sorry, I was probably all over the place a little. This is a very personal issue for me, but I hope that was still, I hope it wasn't a complete waste of time, I guess.
No, absolutely not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Islam, for your comments on the presentation that has been made. So now we want to kind of discussion. So if you have any questions and you can answer, you can ask in the chat box, and then we can ask the discussants the relevant questions that we have. And I just want to kickstart the discussion by asking Ms. Kabir one of the questions. And you mentioned in your remark that due to the current pandemic, the fact that there is a lot of economic hardship that we're seeing going around in the country. And my question is, do you think that can actually be used as a justification for domestic violence? I do know that a lot of us are suffering from health issues, mental health issues especially, and I don't think that has been adequately dealt with in our country. And that is one of the issue, and I think that is one of the reasons why you're right to some extent, that is what it's causing to some extent, domestic violence. But I think the factor of domestic violence predates the current pandemic that has been happening for the last 1.5 years. And I think last 2 years, it has just increased further. So my question, or I just want to know what you think about the fact that the correlation between economic factors and domestic violence.
Thanks. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough. I was trying to be brief.
No.
I'm not stating that as a sort of a justification.
No, I do know that.
No justification of any kind whatsoever. And I want to make that very clear. There is never any justification for violence. Nothing. Absolutely zero. There's never justification. I'm just saying that the kind of unequal society that both Sara and Zyma very passionately stated, of the kind of mindset regarding what a woman's place is, means that a man, he justifies his frustrations of not playing his role as the head of the family and as the breadwinner, even though his wife may be earning as much as he is, going out into the fields and working in the garment factories, working as domestic support staff, whatever it is, working in shops, working in offices, wherever. So even then, the concept that is there throughout is of the male as the breadwinner, the real breadwinner, and the woman's income being a support income. And when he fails, he feels he's failing his role, his frustration comes out in different manners. And that justifies, I'm not saying I think it's justified. As I said before, I don't think any kind of violence against anyone is justified at all. But he thinks it's justified, and a lot of the family members in society thinks it's justified because the poor man. I remember in 74, many of you were not even born then, when there was the famine and the floods. I met a lot of men from the villages who said, I have to say it in Bangla, I'm sorry, I'll try and do it in English, but it won't get the right thing. আপা আমি আর সহ্য করতে পারিনি, আমার বউ বাচ্চা না খেয়ে আছে আর আমি এটা বসে বসে দেখবো, আমি এই কারণেই তাদের ছেড়ে চলে গেছি. So the question is that, I cannot stand and really see my wife and my children starving to death, so therefore I left and came away. The question is, the mother of his children will not say the same thing. She will forage, she will beg, she will find some ways of trying to get some food. She just won't walk off saying that I'm feeling bad. I mean, he's justifying it that he's so caring that he walks off leaving this whole family totally vulnerable. That's the kind of mindset and mentality that exists. So this is what is, the violence exists everywhere all the time throughout years and centuries. That was what my opening remark was. But what the pandemic has done, it's increased it because, and I said for many reasons, and one of the reasons is that there is less exposure and being able to go out and get the kind of support if they need it, because you're locked in your home now. So, and the woman has nowhere to go. The woman has nowhere to go. She can't go back to somewhere or the other because there's a lockdown. So she's forced to stay there with the perpetrator who's violating her in every way, just because and using this as an excuse. I'm not saying that this is something that justifies it totally. I mean, absolutely not. As I said, nothing at all ever justifies violence. I hope I made myself clear.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to understand the correlation, and you have made it abundantly clear what.
So
your
was
thoughts
that
were.
clear enough then?
Yeah, that's clear as well. Thank you, Ms. Kabir. We have one question from Mr. Asaduzaman, and he says, how can we eradicate this evil mindset and culture of unequal treatment towards women in our society? I kindly request Ms. Hossain, Barrister Hossain, to respond to that, if you may. How can we eradicate this evil mindset and culture of unequal treatment towards women in our society?
I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Professor Asaduzaman, because I think you're really focusing on also, I think what Zyma also highlighted, that we need to talk about how to stop this and not just think about it in terms of how do we go and sort out a situation once a crime has been committed. And if we think about issues of justice a bit more like health, I think that also helps us to reimagine the situation, because with health, we wouldn't focus anymore only trying to see, although we're having to do that now, of course, but on just trying to make sure that there are hospitals in place and situations for when people have fallen ill. We look at health from a public health perspective to ensure prevention. And we need to look at justice like that as well. And I think that some of the things that I think we could do much better is we could start learning much earlier about how we behave towards each other. I mean, some of the things that Zyma, some of the examples that Zyma gave kind of come out of this understanding that too many people grow up within our society, that it's okay to comment on someone's dress and looks and behavior and relationships and everything, that, you know, you don't let people do what they want and have the freedom to do what they want. You don't respect that. Someone has to control that all the time, and we have to judge it by these kinds of very archaic and conservative standards. So I think that kind of teaching and training are not just about, you know, saying Article 27 of our Constitution says this, but really trying to understand what equality means and what respect for each other means and what respect for our own bodies means and what freedom of expression means in terms of determining the course of our own lives. I think that kind of education we need from the bottom up. So certainly for you, we're talking today in a university. So I think having that kind of conversation in a university context is really important. I see it all the time in a work context, that people are not necessarily used to working with each other. They don't necessarily even know what the expectations are. And as Zyma said, all kinds of absolutely unacceptable behavior goes by the board, because the people who are victimized also feel that they will be further, you know, they will be stigmatized, basically, if they speak out, and they will not be able to do their work. They'll not be able to be functional. So we have to also, I think, have a duty in terms of those responsible for educational places, for workplaces, for public places, to give these kinds of messages out about what is acceptable, what is not, what does it mean in terms of respect and equality. And certainly in terms of the justice system, I think there's a great deal more to do also there in terms of ensuring effective response. But I think our focus should be around prevention and what we do there, and seeing that these are issues that are not just about law and courts and police, but they're really about all kinds of other groups in society. The media is a critical one, I think, in terms of the messaging that goes out and that we see.
Thank you, Vice Chairperson, for that. We have another question from Mohammad Rezaul Hassan Moon. He says, since there are plenty of laws for the victim of violence which can bring them justice, why majority of the people are still unaware about it, and why we are being failed, or why are we failing to educate our girls and women with legal remedies offering our legal system? I think, Ms. Kabir, if you answered that, I think there are two questions: why the majority of the people are still unaware about the laws, and why, as a state, are we failing to give the adequate protection that the women need? Two questions.
Okay, thank you. I think partly what Sara had mentioned about, you know, when Zyma was giving when she was giving her presentation, you know, her reactions to Nazia's presentation. And Sara was giving a response to the question before. You know, why I think the question that is being raised now is extremely crucial, is why is it that why do we not know about it? Why are the majority of people not aware about it? Majority of the people are not aware of it because they do not want to be aware of it. The system is such that even women buy into this situation of thinking it is a woman has to be married. You cannot have a woman that's single. You cannot have a woman who has her own agency in terms of determining what her life is and what she will accept and what she will not accept, how she will dress, how she will live, what she will do. The society doesn't accept that. And that the whole society agrees to it, women agree to it, and all our social systems that are in place, and including our religions, and whatever laws we may have, which I mentioned right at the beginning, is those who ensure that the implementation of the laws is really done. It is also based on their interpretation of what they think the laws should be saying. And that's all based on how the way they think society should be structured. So it's deliberate. It's deliberately created in such a way that
shame and intimidation.
Yeah, it's actually created that way. So what I'd like to say is I have seen many supposed to be the elite of Dhaka not aware of many laws that exist in the country, even personal laws, what their rights are, even in terms of inheritance, in terms of divorce, in terms of even hilla. So they think that, so when religious laws come in and starts determining that this is what it should be, though laws change over time, even religious laws have had a lot of, reform over time. In all over the world, there are many countries where religious laws have been reformed, and many countries where there's a backlash going on and trying to get back this issue. So I think what it is it's basically wanting and wishing to be able to make these changes. And I think it's our role to ensure that. And I think Sara had talked about this, quite clearly about, I think the question that was raised about why we don't see news like man being punished for beating his wife, because people think it's the right, and because they often use religion and say, if you're a Hindu, your husband is your God, and you're supposed to do puja. If you're Muslim, it's, the part he beats you, that's going to go to heaven kind of thing that is being spread around. How much of it is just interpretation of people who want to control what the mindset is going to be? So I think it's very much something that we need to do. And I'd like to ask you all that every university is supposed to have a sexual harassment prevention committee, and where some members are supposed to be from outside of the university. And I hope that UAP has that. I hope you have it, and I'm sure you have it. If you don't, you should be. And that could be something that can be discussed very much. So
thank you, Ms. Kabir. Thank you. Just to point a very important question.
Just I want to answer this last remarks that we do have this laws on sexual harassment. This morning we had an orientation session, and every time the students are reminded, and we have had cases where we have taken very strict action against the perpetrators to the point that they have been expelled from the university. So we have absolutely strict rules about that. And we first of all, we make everyone aware of it, and then we practice it. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for the clarification. I was just going to say that as well. We have a very important question from Ms. Laika Bashir. She's one of the associate professors in one of our departments of basic science. She asked, do you think we should invite more male members to come forward and talk about sexual harassment in public? And I think I'll give Ms. Islam to answer that question. Ms. Zyma Islam, do you think we should invite more male members to come forward and talk about sexual harassment in public?
I mean, I wasn't aware that this is a very exclusive club that's on invitation only. I'm of the opinion that anyone can talk about this at any time they want. Just because it's related to gender or sexual harassment doesn't mean that I have sole ownership over or any of it. It's like saying that only women can talk about gender violence, or only women should be talking about gender violence. In fact, that's an assumption that everyone makes. Like, I'm somehow the in-house gender expert, even though I don't have a degree in gender studies. I don't. I have a degree in journalism. But I'm somehow the in-house gender expert. And then that's something that often bothers me, is that because I don't, sure, I have lived experiences, but lived experiences are not the same thing as having an actual expertise in the subject, which I do not hold.
I think it's a common thing for us in our country to label people along certain lines. For example, if you are an activist on certain specific areas, we think maybe she or he is an expert, but it could just be that he or she is passionate about that subject.
No, but I'm pretty sure I speak for a lot of women. I'm sure I speak for a lot of women in the profession. Yeah. When I say that it seems as if having a uterus makes us an expert in these matters. And so when it comes to sexual harassment, I've often seen that especially when I'm facing online abuse, or other people around me are facing online abuse, it's often the women around us who are coming forward and fighting that online battle and taking on the trolls and actually providing that sort of emotional support that's needed at that moment. Whereas women I don't even know, women who many of us don't even know, whereas the men we care for the most, the men we value the most, the men we love the most are never there. So it seems to be as if when we're talking about inviting men, there seems to be this assumption that they need to be asked to come and talk about this. It should be a mandate. They should, if they love a woman, then they should be coming to that woman's support should she be facing sexual harassment, or if this is something that they know is something. If they know that sexual harassment is something that the women around them or the women in their lives face, and they should just be talking about it nevertheless. So I hope I don't have to send out any invites to anyone.
No, I mean, I agree with that, but I think it's also a question of mindset. And you have people, me being a male, or you have a lot of people in our generation or the generation before, they don't take these things really seriously in the sense that they should. And I think the kind of culture that we are currently living in doesn't really, they should be encouraged to come and talk about it. And I think they should be taught about the various issues that is currently having a very bad impact. And they are basically showing a very bad lessons to the future generation as well. So I think the people in general, especially males, they should be more educated to what's happening currently, especially after the Me Too movement and everything that is going on. I think in Bangladesh specifically, we have fallen behind on that, and we are really not taking up on those important issues. But I just wanted to say about a very important thing that the presenters and you have raised as well regarding cyberbullying. And I think cyberbullying is something that is not being looked at properly by the various schools and colleges. And I think especially adolescent girls, as Nazia Wahab was pointing out, I mean, 14 to 22-year-olds, right? They are constantly being bullied online, and sometimes the parents don't take it seriously, and they just let it lie under the carpet, and probably they just think, hey, you're just male friends are joking around, but they are not, and maybe they're crossing the line. And so I just wanted to get your opinion, Ms. Islam's opinion first, and then we'll go on to Ms. Barrister Sara Hossain as well. In regard to cyberbullying, I mean, what are the measures that the schools and colleges and universities can actually take to take this matter really seriously and actually deal with it?
Remember when
Just one thing, Dr. Siddiqui, Qayyum Raza Chaudhary was raising his hand a number of times.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll get back to that. Ms. Islam, you just answer the question and then I'll come back as well. I'm sorry.
As well as Sara and the rest. You know, Khushi has been working in the rural areas for quite some time. You know, what we have in the rural areas, this domestic violence, this sexual harassment, these laws, supposing that woman, she can't even go to the court. So she has to depend on the chairman of that particular union. And there's a Salishi board that sits and tries to find out. I'd like Khushi to answer this as to what that we have in the unions and the various unions in our country. The Salish board, is that you know, Nari or Shishu, what do you call, court, court, many of the districts don't have this Nari or Shishu, what do you call, courts. So my question to them is, Salishi board Boshe, what do they think about this? What do they think about this? You know, on sexual harassment, on domestic violence, everything. এরা তো দেখাশোনা করে আনে সালিসি বোর্ড বসে, কয়েকজন বসে, ইউনিয়ন চেয়ারম্যান বসে, পলিটিক্যাল লোকরা বসে to find out what happened to that girl. That's what I want to ask them. What do they feel about it?
Ms. Kabir, if you want to respond to that, then I'll, Ms. Islam.
I think first, do we respond to this first or shall we respond to your question?
No, please. Please respond to Mr. Chaudhary's question.
Okay, it's just that it's not just in the rural areas, even in the urban areas, everywhere. If you look at the slums, but if you don't even look at the slums, look at yourselves and your own family and your friends around you. Whenever there's somebody who has been a victim, who has faced this either cyberbullying, violence of the worst kind, rape or whatever, what does the family actually do? It's across class. They try and hide it. They try and not talk about it. They try and, you know, the thing that comes into the family, or there's been shame that has been brought into the family. We cannot talk about it, then other daughter will never get married. So in the villages, what is happening with the shalishas, the shalishas are always run, usually, most cases, by men, and men from who are powerful. It used to be before the old landlords, but now it is the muscle and the money and the political power who you're close to. They are the ones who determine what the shalish is. And I think Sara can answer, but I have seen the Nari or Shishu that the courts in every district town. I see that is present in the areas I work in. We have many of the cases have been taken to these courts. But regarding the shali, shall be very brief. If you have a very aware and good group of people, like the way places we work in, they attend the shalishas. Many times they have been so good that they're now being asked to be in the shalish board itself. And so even if they're not in the shalish board, from the floor, they raise these issues, like getting this girl married to the rapist. That's a very common solution that is given. Married to the rapist, or give money to the family. Court case will take forever and ever, so here's money and that's it, even if the person has been murdered. So, so here I've seen that when we have given information and when the people are organized and strong enough, landless peasants who are usually kept in the margin, raise this issue as this is not as per law. This is against the law. This is not right. And we refuse to accept this verdict and ensure that that verdict is not actually implemented, and that the survivor does get justice. So it is possible. I'm not saying it's done everywhere, but we have seen in areas where we work that it is possible that if you make people aware, they're able to raise their voices and change the shalish. So the shalish, if you can make what the shalish's role is and what you as an observer, your role is, you as an observer just sitting quiet and listening, then you are actually also supporting the wrong judgment that is being given. So questioning the shalish is also possible, and we do that all the time. So I hope I've answered.
Thank you.
Barrister Hossain, do you want to add anything to that, what Ms. Kabir said?
No, just I just agree with that. I think that just to make that point that shalishes can also be beneficial, not in extreme violence cases, obviously, but in other situations, shalishes can be useful to resolve a dispute. And there's a lot of work by many NGOs to ensure that not only are women included in the shalish as part of the people who are helping to facilitate the dispute resolution, but also that more women, when the family members come from either side, to make sure more women are definitely there, it's more equal, and even the members of the NGOs are there and make that additional space. It's an imperfect solution, but all over the world we see this pressure to try and get things out of the courts and make situations better by making consensual decisions amongst people. So some shalish can be beneficial in that sense, but you're also right to raise your alarm. And actually, I'll put a link, I'll put it in the chat box. There was a more than 10-year long journey in the courts, which many organizations were involved in, trying to get that whole issue of getting fatwas in shalish, treated as totally illegal. And our Supreme Court did finally say that you cannot, in the name of, you cannot issue a so-called fatwa in the course of a shalish, giving some terrible punishment against women or people involved in actions that are not criminal at all. So you could read more about that. And what we do here is that, we don't really hear about fatwas being given any longer. We don't see that language being used, but I think that we shouldn't be too complacent about that, because I think the language is not being used. People have realized that to use the word fatwa like that will create some trouble, but there are still many situations where these kinds of humiliating punishments or decisions that are completely not favorable to a woman are being imposed on her. And those are still situations that have to be looked at very carefully. But I should also finally make clear that, quite right, shalish should not be used at all. What Zyma said, this pressure to do meat-mat in every single case, we should not have that culture in place in cases of serious violence at all, and under any circumstances. But also this meat-mat should not happen without, it shouldn't be something that's forced onto somebody. And I think that's why it's about overall change, because in many situations, women themselves just say, well, hands up, I won't do anymore because I don't have any support. No one will back me up. I don't want to spend my next 50 years like crying over this. I want to get on with my life. And I think we have to change those circumstances that push people into meat-mat rather than, settlement, rather than just, we have to berate the problematic settlements, but also do this bigger picture thing.
Thank you, Barrister Hossain, for that. I think I'll come back to Professor Chaudhary, but as I was asking Ms. Islam the question about cyberbullying, would you respond to that 14 to 22-year-old girls, and in general, we are seeing a lot of cyberbullying among young adults, and that is actually not being dealt with, and no one is actually taking it seriously. And I think that's a very important problem.
Right. So on a school level,
What can be done? I mean,
schools definitely have to absolutely take a no tolerance stance against cyberbullying. So remember when the mastermind student was raped and murdered, the teachers were the first to start victim blaming. The kind of comments that they made on public forums and in to traditional media, it was borderline. Sorry, not borderline abusive. It was absolutely abusive. It was absolutely abusive. And so when you have school teachers and a school administration that's hell bent on victimizing a girl who literally died from bleeding after rape, I'm not sure how we're going to be seeing students who are sensitized to issues like cyberbullying. So these are things. Regular bullying is not dealt with, let alone cyberbullying. Regular bullying happens all the time. Physical, face-to-face bullying happens all the time in our schools. We just this week, we saw a boy commit suicide because he could not take the bullying any longer. I think he was a sixth grader or a seventh grader, and he used to get regularly bullied about his appearance. So without dealing with the issue of bullying in schools, you're not going to be able to deal with cyberbullying. And unfortunately, because, and as Sarah was saying, we live in a culture where we think it's completely all right to make comments about people's appearances, their preferences, their ideas, and schools are not immune from that. School administrations are not immune from that.
And I think I just want to add with what you were saying, and I think the worst bit is we actually see this kind of stuff in educated circles. I mean, people who are educated and normally, middle class, upper middle class families, you actually see this kind of things happening. And I think that's the worst bit, where, you've educated people who just wants to put it under the carpet and you don't hear from it at all. So I think that's a very important point. Now I'd request Professor Chaudhary, I think she has raised her hand. I'm sorry, Professor Chaudhary, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Since from the notion of the Sarapa, as well as Zyma Islam, I got a notion that you were proposing or trying to giving a notion for completely or entirely exclusion of Shalish from the society. If it is, if I'm not wrong, if I'm not understanding.
You are wrong. We didn't say that.
Okay, that's why this is the point where since I'm working with dispute resolution for the last 15 years, including my PhD, if Shalish could be out of the society, there are many people, especially the poor people, they cannot go to the court because of the they cannot go to the formal court due to many disadvantages which are ultimately hidden for getting those justice. So Shalish should be there. This is my first notion, very strongly I should say, that for the mass people, for the poor people, Shalish as an out-of-court mode dispute resolution method, it should be there. However, it must be monitored. It must be trained up in accordance with the line of as much as possible under the shadow of the law. Firstly, the second question, perhaps it will what can I say? Perhaps it's not for Sarapa. Perhaps it is better. This could be better answered by Khushi Appa. So my question is: sometimes family violence could be a very grievous in its nature. If it is so, we have already put under 29 of the Domestic Violence Act. It's a compoundable offense. Compoundable means it's a sort of ADR, out of the court resolution. Since it's a compoundable offense under the section 29 of the Domestic Violence and Prevention Protection Act, don't you think that if you really put that in, that means 29 as compoundable offense against a grievous hurt, when a grievous hurt was done against a wife by his husband or spouse or in-laws, at that time we are ultimately promoting the notion of decriminalization of violence, and at the same time we are ultimately creating a barrier against women's voice and participation in the society.
I think that's a question for Ms. Kabir. Madam, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, she had two questions, one for Sarah and one for me.
Yeah.
So I'll just respond to my part of it. Sarah can add what she wishes to add to it. So the thing is that when you talk about compoundable offense that is of a grievous nature, I think that is not something that the Shalish should look after. The Shalish can look after the other kinds of issues that get raised, and where you don't really need to go to court because court is expensive, it's lengthy, and it's often, it's not something that you automatically get your justice, because way I've seen the way courts work, it's a system where you have to have the right lawyer, you have to have the right judge with the right kind of mentality, you have to have your right set of all your evidences and everything else. So the shalish works very well on the, something that is not of a very serious nature. So there it's very useful and very important, but it should not be misused, which shalish often is. I think the question that was raised by Qayyum Raza Chaudhary was basically that often the shalish does get misused, and where the victim is, if the victim is someone who's more vulnerable and marginalized, that person doesn't get any kind of a justice. So I think this is, I'll just be very quick. I think the issue is that what can be resolved by shalish, and to see and ensure that the shalish is done judicially and as it should be done, where it is justice is really given. That is one thing. But the other is when it's something of such a grievous and severe nature, which is a criminal offense, it's a compoundable offense. If it's an offense that where, like murder or rape, I don't think a shalish should be resolving rape and murder, because that rapist and that murderer will get away with doing rape and murder again and again, as we've seen. Then you need to go to court, and there's no other resolution except going to court. Now, how do we make the courts work is what we've been discussing all this while, and can continue to keep discussing, because these are things that have to be talked about more and more and more. And often the courts have given in the higher level good judgments. Sometimes we have not had the judgments we have wished we could have. So I think there are many things that still need to be looked at and resolved. So
thank you so much, Khushi Appa. Here I would like to add one thing. Sometimes, though we believe 100% believe that we activists are believe that rape, murder, these kinds of grievous offense should not be conducted by shalish. Obviously not. However, the reality is sometimes different. Sometimes rape, even murder, are sometimes dealt with by shalish, village shalish. So my question was relating to that. By doing that, don't we, whether we are ultimately not promoting decriminalization of violence, we are doing these violence issues, grievous violence issues by ourselves, in the name of shalish. So we are promoting the notion of decriminalization of violence. Do you think so?
No, I think we're all speaking on the same page. There's no difference in what we are saying. I mean, I've been saying right from the beginning that shalish, and so has Sara, and so has everybody else said, that the shalish is only valid and good for certain issues, where you don't, for every little thing like who's stolen whose chicken, you don't need to go to court for that. Those can be discussed and worked out, but the shalish system has to be observed, participatory, and it has to be very transparent. It isn't that a few people make the decision themselves, and it should not be gendered, like it meaning only the male hierarchy. So that's something that needs to be looked at. So that we have discussed all that. So I think Professor Jamila Chaudhary, you and all of us around here today are on the same page, and we are talking about the same thing. Everything cannot be done by shalish, and we don't want the shalish to be, we don't want to, have the shalish take on cases which they're not qualified to take on, and which are criminal in nature, and which are of a grievous kind. That is something that courts should be doing. Otherwise, why do we have courts? Why do we have laws? Why do we have police?
I think you've made an excellent point. If I may just cut in, I'm sorry. I think Mr. Ishfaqullah Chaudhary made a very important point about the fact that we actually have a lot of sexual harassment of boys in madrasas.
Absolutely.
And that is something that is not being taken up seriously, and sometimes sporadically we see it's being covered by newspapers, and then suddenly it goes away. I kindly request Barrister Sara Hossain, and then Ms. Kabir, you could add as well. What is your take on that?
Mr. Siddiqui, here again.
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you again. We'll cover everything. I'll come back to you again. Let's respond to that, then we'll come back again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So we're talking about sexual harassment in madrasas. I mean,
Yeah. Thank you, Ishrak, very much for that question. Yes, obviously that's a very important issue. And I think it's not just in madrasas. I mean, I think there is sexual harassment of boys also in other institutions, in other schools, particularly in boarding schools, other kinds of institutions, like, for example, children's homes. So I think it's a broader issue. And of course, within the family, I think that's the other thing. We're talking a lot about the government and the state and public institutions. We haven't talked really as much about the family as a site of violence. And I think that's also really important, that people particularly don't speak. And the whole issue about violence against men and boys is something that we really don't speak about. We've talked about the kind of stigma there is against women when they speak about the violence that they've faced, but there's even more stigma, if anything, I think, against boys acknowledging that they face this kind of thing. So it's extremely important to talk about it. I should just raise one example of what happened when, this is not to do with sexual violence, but in the case of beatings of children and sort of just your beatings, forcible cutting of hair, other kinds of punishments given to children in institutions. We've been involved in a case about this like 10 years ago, I think, in the High Court. There was a judgment by Justice Iman Ali saying all corporal punishment in schools is prohibited. Interestingly, when the different boards of education had to report on what they were doing, the Madrasa board actually was the quickest and fastest in reporting and giving a very solid report on that. So I think that's, I don't know whether they've been as active in responding on issues about harassment and sexual harassment allegations, but it seems to me that that's, you know, we also have to look at accountability from those kinds of institutions, is what are they actually doing about looking at putting in place the kind of mechanisms. And connecting with the question someone raised earlier about, I think Professor Asaduzzahman, about preventing violence, again on sexual harassment, it's only a minute tip of the iceberg of the cases that we ever get to know about. Most people simply won't report it for all the reasons that got talked about. And that's why making information available in schools, colleges, madrasas, that this is completely unacceptable, that there is somewhere safe you can go to report it, and that people should see that action is taken when reports are being made. If we don't have that, we won't be able to shift the culture, because everyone will understand that speaking out makes it worse for you, not for the person who does the harassment. You're the one who get victimized. So that's what we have to make the shift in that place.
Ms. Kabir, do you want to add anything else to that? Or you can unmute yourself.
Sara, yeah, sorry.
All right.
Sara's covered it very well.
Right. Excellent.
I mean, I do agree with her, and I think I thank Ishfaq Ilahi for raising this, and it should be raised again and again. And I think awareness on this has to come out.
Right. There are a lot of questions that I wanted to take, but unfortunately we need to wrap it up because we are actually short of time. I'll now kindly request our Mohammad Asaduzzahman, Associate Professor at the Department of Law and Human Rights, to give a vote of thanks to everybody. Mr. Asaduzzahman. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just. Thank you so much. It was a very wonderful program. We have enjoyed a lot, and we have also learned a lot of things from this session. So at first, let me express my heartfelt thanks to our guest speaker and discussant, Ms. Khushi Kabir, Barrister Sara Hossain, and Zyma Islam for their wonderful discussions on the relevant topics. We are also very thankful to our honorable BOT members. I can see Kaim Raza Chaudhary Sir and architect Mahbooba Haq. Their presence makes our program really meaningful. We are also very glad to see our honorable acting VC, Professor Sultan Mahmood. We are delighted to see some of my teachers of Dhaka University, Professor Dr. Shahnaz Huda, and my friends, Professor Dr. Jamil Ahmed Chaudhary, for their wonderful contribution in these programs. We are also very thankful to Madam Franz Marquette, Principal Trustee of Madanjit Singh Foundation. This foundation is active partner in our department programs. So we are really very thankful to her and their foundation. We are also very delighted to see some of our very senior officials and professors of our university, like Air Commodore Ishfaqilai Chaudhuri, Professor Mizanur Rahman, Dean, Professor Dr. Tariq Aziz Chaudhuri, Professor Alok Kumar Shah, and other distinguished faculty members of the University of Asia Pacific and other universities. I am extremely thankful to our head of the department for his hard work and sincerity to organize all these programs and support us to organize these programs. We should also thankful to our keynote presenters who worked hard to make this program a success, Ms. Nazia Wahab, all other faculty members and participants from various organizations, and our dear students for whom we organize these programs. So we try to cover everyone because this is a virtual program. Someone may be left. Actually, we want to express our deepest thanks to everyone who participated in this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Asaduzzaman. I just want to thank all our Ms. Nazia Wahab for a wonderful presentation that she has given, and we started the discussion with her presentation. I would also like to thank Ms. Khushi Kabir, Barrister Sara Hossain, and Ms. Zyma Islam as well, eminent personalities in their own right. And I want to thank everyone in the Department of Law and Human Rights and also SAILS for helping us organize this event. I think these kind of discussions are extremely important, but we also need to take proper steps where we can actually do something which can reduce domestic violence, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying. These are serious issues that really needs to be taken into account, and we cannot just brush it under the carpet and hope everything is going to be all right. We talk about economic development of Bangladesh, we talk about GDP, we talk about GNP, but the fact remains that although we are doing economically well as a society, we are falling far behind than other countries. And if we cannot improve in those kind of factors, it's a hollow fact just to say that, we have become a developed country or whatever that we wish it to be. So thank you everyone for your time and for your patience. I would like to apologize to everybody who I could not give space to answer questions due to time constraints, but I hope we'll be continuing to make this kind of seminars, and I hope everyone is going to participate. So please stay safe, stay well, wear your mask, please do not go out, and I hope to see all of you guys in the future. Thank you. Have a nice day and have a pleasant evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you and Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon.